Hello, everyone. This is the 128th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog, and I am joined by Paul from Shipley, England, and the 1888 Letter blog. For this episode, we interview English author and podcaster Mr. Rocco Dean as we discuss his book, The Sons of Revie, Leeds United's Decade of Dominance. In addition to this book that we will discuss, Mr. Dean is the author of many other Leeds United related books, such as Marcelo Bielsa versus the Damned United, The O'Leary Years, League One Leeds, and Marcelo Bielsa versus the Premier League. He is also a presenter on the Leeds United related podcast, Leeds That, or at Leeds That. Welcome, Rocco.
Thank you for having me.
Can you introduce yourself and your trajectory into football?
Certainly, yeah. I was born in 1983, so I'm 40 years old now. But yeah, I was very quickly into football, obsessed by it, probably by the age of 5 or 6. And yeah, my main memories of football, or first memories of football, was the '90 World Cup in Italy, which was especially heartbreaking for me, being part Italian and part English, because yeah, both my teams lost on penalties in the semi-finals, which is quite the introduction, and yeah, basically prepared me for a lifetime of misery supporting Leeds United, where I've been a season ticket. I got my first season ticket in 92-93, so that was the inaugural Premier League season when Leeds were champions, and yes, it was all downhill from there pretty much.
Thank you. You've been very prolific these last few years, writing multiple books related to Leeds United, as Sean described at the start. I imagine as a Leeds United historian, the Don Revie era is the golden age. Was it the mystique of this era that prompted you to write book?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, growing up as a Leeds fan, you know, we're sort of lucky to have all these legends from the Revie era around the club. You know, they're all, you know, pretty much all of them are one club men. So they all sort of have been still involved with the club as ambassadors, or, you know, on local radio station reporting on the club. So like, I knew a lot, or I thought I knew a lot about the area, to be fair, but I was keen to dive into it and learn more. And you know, the books that I did read about the era, like, it always left me wanting a bit more. And you know, you read a lot of autobiographies and it's all from the player's perspective, but never from the fans' perspective. So you know, what I really wanted to do was to explore how it was being a Leeds fan in those days, where you know, going for 3 trophies, 4 trophies every season, and semi-finals, finals of European competitions, chasing the title every year. You know, it's something that's alien to me. We had it very, very briefly in the O'Leary era. But yeah, it was really just wanting to sort of put on record what it was like as a fan. And my dad was, you know, he lived through it. He was born in 51 and started going to Ellen Road in Don Revie's first season. So that tied in perfectly as well, had all his information to hand and his memories to use, and yeah, try and make it an authentic account of what it was like back then. So that's how I've sort of come to write it through his eyes, if you like. You know, it's you know, written in the first person, but me sort of imagining myself as my dad at the time.
As you mentioned, your book is unique in that sense that it's narrated through the experiences of your father, who at the time was a young Leeds fan, witnessing this era, and he in turn transmitted this love of Leeds United to you. Can you discuss your father's influence on you as a Leeds fan, and why did you decide to use this method to write the book?
Yeah, quite interestingly, my dad, he had no bearing on me becoming a Leeds fan. So even though he's a massive Leeds fan himself, I actually originally supported Everton in the '89 Cup final. It was Liverpool v Everton, and me and my brother were playing football, and he decided he would be Liverpool and I would be Everton, and it stuck until 1992, basically, for me anyway. My brother's still a Liverpool fan. But in 92, February, I was taken to Ellen Road because my dad's friend had a spare ticket, basically. And as soon as I set foot inside, I was a Leeds fan. I just felt at home, and that was me done. So my dad never really put any pressure on me or anything like that. But then, from that moment, of course, he gets me a season ticket, and, his influence then is basically, just being there, taking me, enabling me as I grew up, taking me to away matches, started going to away matches together in like 1997. So yeah, he wasn't influential in me becoming a Leeds fan, but certainly, helped my obsession, put it that way. And then, like using him for the book was just a no-brainer, really. I mean, that was always the intention. He wanted me to write a book about this era, and I was a little bit apprehensive at first because I didn't know if I'd be able to do it, having not lived through it. But yeah, once we started trying, and I would ask, I sort of came up with an outline of the matches I wanted to cover, and then I would get all his memories and get him to talk about each specific player and his memories of those, and any anecdotes, and how it was going to the games, and all those sort of match rituals back in the day. And that's, it was able to give it an authentic flavour that way.
The structure of your book's separated season by season, and for each season you discuss a few particular matches, and within those you discuss the general narrative of the season. How did you come to choose the specific matches?
Yeah, it was mainly, so I would basically go through each season. So, find a list on the internet of all the fixtures, and sort of pick out what looked like the biggest games. And then as I sort of researched it, it would sort of basically bring my attention to what games should be covered. I wanted it to be around about 10 games a season so that it flows quite fast, but also at the same time, giving a complete picture of what the season was like. So including things like injuries that they faced, and the story of each season basically. But it written through some main matches, but also influenced as well by my dad's memories as well. So there's a few games in there that maybe wouldn't have gone in normally, but my dad had strong memories and some good stories about. So they fitted in nicely. And similarly, there's some stuff I had to leave out just because it sort of didn't fit in with the flow of the book. So a lot of editing goes into it. You write the bones of the story down, and then go over it 100 times, sort of improving and taking things out and adding bits that you learn along the way. So a lot of research as well. But my dad's memories were certainly the backbone of the story.
Let's start off by introducing Don Revie. What was his trajectory as a player and manager when we come to Leeds' first season in the first division, 1964-65 season, following promotion?
Yeah, so I mean, Don Revie had been a brilliant footballer. He'd won Player of the Year, Football Writers Player of the Year, played in FA Cup finals. I don't think he won too much. I think he won one FA Cup, I think with Manchester City. And he came to Ellen Road, joined Leeds as a player quite late in his career. I don't know how influential he was. I mean, Leeds weren't a good side back then. They'd been in the second division a little while. John Charles had left to go to Juventus. But then, in like 1961, Revie was actually on the verge of joining another club. I think it was Bournemouth, unless I'm remembering wrong. And they spoke to the Leeds chairman, sort of asking for his reference for Don Revie as a potential manager. And the chairman, while he was writing down such a glowing reference for Revie as a manager, like suddenly clicked, maybe we should ask him to be manager because he fits the bill perfectly. So, that's how he ended up getting the Leeds job. But it was difficult. And it's funny looking back, nowadays, he would have been out of the door. He took over, I think, in March 1961. And a year later, they were at rock bottom of the second division, on the verge of going down. But they managed to sign Bobby Collins, who was a massive signing, a Scotland international from Everton. He dropped down the leagues and he helped keep them up. And then from there, Revie put faith in the youth players. And then it was up and up from there. Managed to get promoted in 1964. Nowadays, there's no chance that a manager, 1 year into his first managerial job, the team rooted to the bottom of the second division, he'd have just never lasted. So thank goodness we were in that era.
Can you describe the backbone of his squad at the time, some of whom are obviously legends of British football?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a player that he inherited. Obviously, a lot of them were young players that he brought through the ranks, but Jack Charlton, when you talk of the backbone of his squad, there could be nobody more important than him. World Cup winner with England, and a centre-back that hadn't had a fantastic career, but under Revie, he absolutely blossomed, and he was just monumental for Leeds. That we had a really solid defence, and he was at the heart of that. And then alongside him, you have Norman Hunter, again, was in the World Cup winning squad for England, went on to play over 700 games and, win nearly everything, playing all 12 cup finals that we were in 12 years or 10, 12 years from promotion onwards. And then you have Billy Bremner, the captain in midfield, just a dynamo, scoring goals, scoring in the biggest games, an uncanny knack of scoring in semi-finals, scored the winning goal in 4 semi-finals for Leeds. And then you have players like Eddie Gray and Peter Lorimer on each wing who sort of added the flair to the team. Johnny Giles alongside Bremner as well, player who had played for Man United as a right winger. And Matt Busby said it was his biggest mistake in football, not seeing his potential as a central midfielder. So Don moved him into the centre of midfield with Bremner, and their partnership. Well, they were made to play together. A remarkable midfield, and then up front where Don actually signed 2 players, which was very, very rare. Mick Jones and Alan Clark, 2 strikers who did play for England, but didn't have, they never excelled on the international stage. But for Leeds, they were goal machines, and again, they complemented each other so well, and just sort of put the finishing touches to the team. So, a really, really strong backbone of the side, very combative. They basically had everything in the locker. They could play you off the park. They could kick you off the park. And I think that's what I like about them the most.
When we read your book, the one thing that stands out is just how competitive the English league was at that point, and the rivals that Leeds had to compete with season after season, and the sheer number of matches they had to play, as they usually went far in the cup competitions, and also the lack of the transfer activity. Can you touch up on these aspects of Revie's Leeds?
Yeah, so I mean, the transfer activity is a funny one. Again, in the modern era, I mean, it's just complete. Well, I say it's completely unheard of. I mean, Tottenham went a few years without signing anybody, but yes, from the year they got promoted into the first division, they didn't sign anybody in the summer until 1969. 5 seasons. They signed 1 player, a winger from Huddersfield, in that time. And then, 1968, they added Mick Jones as a striker. But up until 68-69 season, it was a bit of an incomplete side. They didn't really have a striker, and a lot of the supporters were getting on the club's back for not spending any money, not buying a striker to fill what was a bit of a gaping hole. But they were still competitive, and Don kept bringing through young player after young player, 2 or 3 each season that would, keep building the squad up and, replacing the older players and just improving the team. And every one of the young players that came into the squad, would just fulfill their potential entirely, which is, again, in itself, very, very strange. But very, very competitive era. You have all the top clubs in England with statues outside the grounds from this era. You have, Man United who won the European Cup in 1968, Sir Matt Busby. Then you have, obviously, at Liverpool, Bill Shankly, 2 of the greatest legends of those 2 clubs. And then Arsenal, you have Bertie Mee. They won the double in 1971. Chelsea, that was their golden era up until the Abramovich takeover. They won the FA Cup, the Cup Winners' Cup, sort of up there, challenging in the league. West Ham had the famous 3 World Cup winners in their team. They never actually managed to do too much. I think they did win. They did win I think they won the FA Cup and Cup Winners' Cup as well. Even Newcastle won the UEFA Cup, or the Fairs Cup as it was at the time. Manchester City, that was their only real period of success up until their takeover. So it was just, Tottenham as well. Tottenham were, the biggest spenders in the country. Bill Nicholson, huge legend of their club. He won a number of trophies, but none of them could get the better of Leeds. Leeds finished above all of them nearly every single season. Liverpool finished ahead of Leeds 3 times in Don Revie's 10 First Division seasons. And Man United finished above us twice, and Arsenal twice, and anyone else just did it once, Everton and Spurs once. And I think that was it. You know, Leeds were just sort of towering over everybody else, even though this was a club with, you know, a small fan base, you know, small attendances, no history of success, and not even spending any money, just doing it with kids. It's, yeah, just an absolute fairy tale.
Let's go back to the first 4 seasons back in the First Division from 1964-65 through to 1967-68 that culminated with the League Cup win a month later, the Fairs Cup, that acted as reference points for the future titles. What are the main takeaways from this first phase?
I think it was. I mean, they burst onto the scene. The first season in the top flight, they only lost the title on goal difference and finished second to Man U, and then also lost the FA Cup final as well in extra time. So couldn't come closer to winning the double and winning nothing. Sets the tone actually. But yeah, it was those first few seasons where they had the nickname of being the bridesmaids. They couldn't quite get over the line. They were getting to the semi-finals and finals of FA Cup, Fairs Cup, finishing second in the league twice as well, finishing fourth a couple of times. But, you know, both on both occasions, they were in the title race, but couldn't get the job done. And it was just a very, very young side, sort of learning the ropes. Don Revie was giving the young players license to make mistakes. Again, you know, when he would be questioned about the weaknesses in the team, he would always go back to the facts that he didn't want to stop the youngsters. You know, he was convinced that the youngsters would put Leeds on the map. Of course, he was right about that in the end. But yeah, it was quite a difficult period in the fact that they just couldn't get over the line by actually winning anything. And I think the thing about this period as well is that they were still very reliant on their more combative traits. They were seen as fighters and called dirty Leeds at the time. I'm not so sure that that's entirely the case. I mean, they had a reputation, and all the players will say that they weren't dirty. They weren't dirtier than the rest. But when it came to playing Leeds, teams were up for the battle automatically, and Leeds were up for it as well. So I think a lot of it was trying to basically fight their way through. I don't think they were outplaying teams like they were in a few of the later seasons as the team sort of matured, and you have players like Eddie Gray and Lorimer sort of blossoming into the talents that there were. It was probably a bit more workmanlike team at that time.
Leeds United, after so many near misses, finally won the league title in the 1968-69 season, breaking records along the way. What stands out from this particular season?
Yeah, I think 2 defeats, just 2 league defeats, which was unheard of in a 42-game season as it was back then. I think the previous record was 4 defeats as the lowest number. And Leeds halved that. They lost 5-1 at Burnley, I think just before Christmas. And then after that, they didn't lose another game. A few weeks later, Burnley came to Ellen Road and Leeds put 6 past them. It was just, perfect poetic justice to get their revenge. And but it wasn't plain sailing, even though, they broke all these records, most points won, fewest defeats, most wins. It was still really tight. So with a few weeks to go, it was a 4-horse race, and Leeds still had to play the other 3 contenders away from home. So the last 3 away games, Everton, Arsenal and Liverpool, still had to play all 3 contenders away. And they drew at Everton, they beat Arsenal 2-1, and they end up going to Anfield, needing a draw to win the league, and getting a 0-0 draw, which was pretty typical of the team at the time. Like I said before, they were sort of famed for a blanket defence. Leeds could just shut you out, and they were quite cynical. They'd gained a load of traits that they'd learnt from playing European teams, the dark arts, as they call it. And Leeds were pretty good at that. And it was a rearguard action at Anfield, and they got the result that they needed. And then there's a real standout moment where at the final whistle, Don Revie sends his players he tells them to go and take the trophy to the Kop end where the Liverpool fans are, the main Liverpool fans. And the team are obviously trepidation at the thought of taking the trophy to show off to the fans that have just lost the title. But Liverpool gave them an unbelievable ovation. The whole stadium was singing champions at them as they did a lap of honour, as if it was a home game. And, it's really emotional learning about that happening. And it's an amazing thing, and something that I will always respect Liverpool for. But it's also reflective of, what was quite a friendly rivalry at the time. Leeds and Liverpool were the two main clubs at the time. Man United, I think their best years were probably behind them, by the late 60s. But Leeds and Liverpool continued the rivalry into the 70s. But it was very different to some of the rivalries Leeds had with, like, the London clubs, for example. The Leeds-Liverpool rivalry was always, just based on, who was the best football team, not kicking lumps out of each other. And yeah, Don Revie and Bill Shankly and Matt Busby as well were, all best mates. They'd all speak to each other on a Saturday night after, about their games. And yeah, that was reflected in the games and the rivalries on the pitch.
Let's look at the next 4 seasons following the league title, when, as you've said, Leeds are always competitive and finished runners-up 3 seasons in a row from 1970 to 72, finished third in 73. Along the way, they win the First Cup in 71 and the FA Cup in 1972, but they lose to Chelsea in 1970 and then Second Division Sunderland in the 1973 final. So there's 2 cup wins, but so many near misses in the league and cup in this period. How would you describe this phase?
Yeah, I think it's a case of what could have been. They did well to win trophies. I mean, they're winning trophies every season pretty much. It is still fantastic. And, it got to, after 1972, the record in finals was actually quite good. They'd won a lot of finals and not lost very many. And, they've always seemed to play well in finals. But, 1970 especially, was a tough one to take. How they didn't beat Chelsea. They hit the woodwork about 4 or 5 times. But yeah, it's just, it's a hard luck story at the end of the day. The league titles that they could have won and couldn't quite get over the line. But this was the period where Leeds came into their own and really, truly became, one of the greatest sides, or at the time, the greatest side that Britain had ever seen or England had ever seen. Obviously, the Celtic side, the Lisbon Lions, they'd have a lot to say about, whether they were the best, and they beat Leeds as well in the European Cup semi-final. But Leeds had broken all records. This was the best team that Britain had ever seen. And the football that they played, obviously, there's the famous one against Southampton. Everyone will have seen the couple of minutes where they're showboating at the end of the match with all the flicks and tricks. It's the sort of thing you'd expect to see from, the 1970 Brazil side or Di Stefano's Real Madrid side of the 50s. It was phenomenal and really showcased how talented they were. And at that period, they were just sort of pummeling everybody at Ellen Road. It was a phenomenal time. But yeah, the fixtures and the congestion that they faced was just horrendous. And there's just nothing you can do about it. The FA Cup semi-finals that they had to play, replay after replay, it just ended up catching up with them. And at the end of the season, they would be playing a game every other day or even playing, matches back to back as well. It was ludicrous, some of the fixture runs that you see, 7 games in 11 days, things like that. Obviously, they don't have big squads. They can't make 5 substitutions. It's just 1 sub allowed at this time. So, yeah, I think everything just sort of conspired against them, really. And yes, they won nearly everything there was to win. But yeah, just a massively disappointed that they didn't win more and get more cracks at the European Cup. Ultimately, they were only ever able to have 2 European Cup campaigns. And if they'd have managed to get a couple more titles under the belt, I'm absolutely convinced they would have won at least 1 European Cup.
So under Revie, Leeds also became a force in Europe in this era. They finished runners-up in the First Cup in 1967, losing to Dinamo Zagreb, but were victorious in the 1968 edition against Ferencváros and the 1971 edition against Juventus. They lost the 1973 Cup Winners' Cup final to AC Milan. And as you mentioned, the European Cup matches against Celtic in 1970, the Battle of Britain, is part of British football history. How important were these European adventures in establishing their legendary status?
Yeah, I think they were absolutely vital, definitely, because it sort of proved to everybody that not only were Leeds one of or the best team in Britain or England, but also on the continent as well. Nobody wanted to play Leeds in these days. And although, like I said, they didn't win the European Cup, and that's obviously affected their legacy. This Leeds team doesn't get talked about nowadays, alongside the greats, because they didn't win it. But their exploits in the Fairs Cup, which was known back then as a harder tournament to win, because there was more of the top teams from each country. Often they're the up-and-coming teams, the ones that haven't just won the league, but the ones that are coming up and about to win it, or about to enjoy really successful eras. And it gave us incredible battles and memories. Like you say, the Celtic game, Hampden Park, there was 136,000 there, record attendance for UEFA. Probably it'll never be beaten. And like playing teams like AC Milan in the 73 Cup Winners' Cup final, a team that was on the verge of winning a treble themselves, Gianni Rivera and lots of legends, but Leeds absolutely they were awesome that night, and they really outplayed Milan. And there's a lot of controversy about the referee that night. He never refereed again, never proven that he was bribed by AC Milan, but very controversial defeat nevertheless. So again, they did incredibly well. Juventus in the 71 final, another up-and-coming team that would dominate Italy for years, and Leeds overcame them. And in the 1975 European Cup, they overcame Barcelona, Johan Cruyff and Neyskins, some of the top teams that the world has ever seen, and Leeds were overcoming them, coming up against Bayern Munich in the final, and again outplaying them. Very controversial defeat. The Bayern team with Gerd Müller and Beckenbauer, 3 European Cups in a row they won in the end. The one that beat Leeds was the second. Germany were the world champions as well, and they had 7 of the Germany team at Bayern. So they were basically world and European champions at international and club level. And Leeds were again the better team that night. Even Bayern Munich did agree and admitted that Leeds were very unfortunate not to win that game. So it certainly solidified in Leeds fans' minds at least that what we had was incredibly special and the best team in the world in the day.
And finally, a second league title arrived in 1974. And how was this title essentially different to the first that had been won 5 years earlier?
It was very different, because it was that summer where Don Revie challenged his team to go the whole season without getting a player booked. So I think by this point, he was a bit sick of the reputation that they had brought upon themselves, you might say, for being a dirty team. And he wanted them to behave like angels, basically. And first part of the season they did. It took them 8 games to pick up a booking finally. The fair play attitude got them a lot of plaudits at the time, and they ended up flying out of the blocks, and they were miles ahead in the title race, but in the end they started getting clawed back in, and it ended up becoming very, very tense. But again, the thing in 1969 when they won the league the first time, and 1974 when they won the league the second time, these were the 2 seasons where they had no other trophies to fight for. So they were able to concentrate on the league, the only 2 out of the 10 seasons under Don Revie, and both times they won the league. So it sort of does make you question, should they have sacrificed other competitions to try and win more league titles, which is a whole other question. But that league title as well, the players have said that it was the most satisfying, not just because it came towards the end of their careers, but because they had so many injuries and so many challenges to overcome, and the difficulties and disappointments that they'd face in being runners up so many times and losing to Sunderland in the FA Cup final, a second division team, and then a few days later losing the Cup Winners' Cup to AC Milan. To bounce back again and win the league meant the world to them, and especially to get over the line in really difficult circumstances by the end of the season.
I imagine Revie felt that he had gone as far as he could with this squad, and this title was the culmination of his cycle. And that's maybe a reason why he accepted the England manager's position. Was this the consensus from the Leeds faithful?
Yeah, there is definitely there is that thought. So a lot of people have speculated that Don Revie, he couldn't face telling certain players, players that had basically dedicated their lives to him and to Leeds United. He couldn't face telling them that they were no longer wanted at Leeds. He didn't want to rip the team apart, and the England job came up, and it was good timing for him to say goodbye. I'm not so sure, to be quite honest, because, the rebuild had already started. He brought in Joe Jordan and Duncan McKenzie in defence, and he had some new youth players coming through, like Terry Oreth and a few other players that were looking like could take Leeds on and continue the legacy and into a long-lasting dynasty. And of course, the main thing is that he had this second crack at the European Cup, which he had to sacrifice to take the England job. And I do think at the end of the day, it was just the fact that it was England. And, you don't say no to your country. I think if England would have come knocking earlier, maybe he would have taken the job then. There was always a bit of difficult relationship with the Leeds board as well. He'd nearly left on numerous occasions to go to other English clubs or European clubs, but he'd always ended up sticking it out. But yeah, when it came to England calling, I think at that point he just couldn't say no to England, and maybe it was an added bonus, if you like, that he didn't have to break up the team that had given him so much.
Across his time at Leeds, what were the main innovations that were made by Don Revie, both on and off the field?
Yeah, I mean, on the field, it's quite amazing, really. His main thing is the dossiers that he used to have produced for him. So he would scout, or his coaches would scout every team and bring back these incredibly long dossiers about all the opposition players, and they would have team meetings and run through all these notes that a lot of the players found very boring. A lot of the press, sort of gave him grief for. I mean, he did go to extreme lengths. He would still produce new dossiers and go over everything for replays. Playing the same team again, and he would always make the opposition sound like world beaters. They'd be playing, I don't know, Newport in the FA Cup third round, and their players would sound like up-and-coming Real Madrid players. A bit of fun to poke at it, but nowadays everybody does it. It's normal and expected, and Dom was the first person to do that. Also, the focus on diet and fitness was huge, and not common at the time. It prolonged Jack Charlton's career. He ended up going on till he was 36, 37 years old. Yeah, so I think on the pitch there were the main innovations, and then off the pitch as well. He was a real visionary. He was the one that thought about, first person to think about sponsorship on the front of the shirts. He was the first person to come up with the idea of selling the football shirt to the fans. He would talk about executive boxes and match day programs with interviews and producing a magazine that would entertain the fans pre-match. Leeds at the time also, they started doing these pre-match routines again, just to sort of titifate the fans, if you like, and get them up for the game. They would come out early and do practice drills, sort of synchronized warm-ups and kick balls into the crowd. So all these different things. Also, he was campaigning for professional referees from the 60s onwards. It took obviously 30 odd years for that to come into play. But a real deep thinker of the game. And he brought us a lot of innovations that I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear about.
As you've mentioned a few times, Leeds had the reputation of being a dirty physical team. They say the truth is always somewhere in the middle, and there had to be more to this. Can you discuss some of the misconceptions about this reputation?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's unfair. I think, like, for example, people nowadays will always point to the 1970 FA Cup final as the dirtiest game of all time. And when you rewatch that game, and it has been done, and referees have rewatched it and sort of re-refereed it, and they said there'll be like 7 red cards nowadays, but the vast majority are for Chelsea players. Leeds are on the receiving end of a lot of very, very dirty play in that game. And I think that typifies it. I think teams would come up against Leeds and they knew that they wouldn't be able to outplay them by that point, and they had to try other methods. And I think Leeds they were hard enough to sort of respond to it and take that battle face on. So I think that did go against them. I don't think there's there's not any real cases in European competition, whereas, opposition ever complaining that Leeds are a dirty team. I never heard it once in doing all my research. Leeds had a better reputation on the continent than they did back home. I've read that from a few players saying that, especially in Italy, the press and the fans, really liked the way they went about their business. They weren't dirty. They were just sort of, playing the game. It was a hard man's game at the time. And they would always, that's the other thing as well, they're such a united team of brotherhood, if you like. These players that have grown up together from, a lot of them from the age of 14, 15, all in it together. They're going to stick up for each other famously. They're not going to give a quarter to anybody. And I think, probably that plays its part as well in sort of, bringing this reputation. And of course, they weren't angels. We know that, Billy Bremner, if you hear opposition fans talking about him, being in referees' ears all the times. And I'm sure, like I said before about dark arts, an elbow into the ribs here and there, standing on their toes. But like I say, I don't think it was just Leeds. I think this was just football at the time.
For many, Leeds should have been more successful with so many near misses in league and cups, despite all the trophies that they did win. Would you say it was a combination of factors? There's obviously the crowded English calendar and all those replays, lack of transfers, as we've mentioned, and the fact that the league was so competitive with, Shankly's Liverpool, Busby's Manchester United, those kind of teams as well.
Yeah, I do. I think it does come down to the fixture thing for me. I mean, Leeds actually did have quite a large squad in the end. In the 70s, they had sort of 16 international players, which was pretty unheard of at the time. So, but yeah, Don Revie would always play his best team pretty much. I think in the League Cup, he would always sacrifice that and play reserve players in that. But otherwise, it was the same 11 every week unless there were injuries. So maybe he should have rotated more. Maybe he should have sacrificed the European competitions. But then again, they had such great success in Europe. But it'll always remain a real regret that they didn't have more chances to win the European Cup. I don't know whether Don Revie would have changed anything. I mean, the other thing that he always used to say was that because Leeds were only getting crowds of 30,000, whereas Man United, Liverpool, Tottenham, Arsenal, Chelsea would get 50,000. So Leeds had to get extra revenue in, and the way to get extra revenue was from these extra matches, from cup runs. So the European exploits basically meant that Leeds were able to afford to keep their players and to redevelop Ellen Road and build it into a stadium that was worthy of the team. So, yeah, basically they had to get the money, and they didn't. He felt it was like a financial decision as much as anything to make sure that Leeds continued to compete at the top. So, yeah, it's a difficult subject, and, yeah, certainly not helped by the golden era of English football that we were in. Researching the book, I looked at the following era. So Liverpool from 76 to 85, they won the exact same number of points as Leeds if you weight it down. So it changed to 3 points per game in that period, but points per game, 1.95 for both sides, exactly the same. And Liverpool won 7 titles and Leeds won 2. And then Liverpool converted 4 of those 7 titles into European Cup wins, which really is heartbreaking to think that, Leeds had collected as many points, definitely did play more games. Liverpool didn't win an FA Cup, or maybe won 1 FA Cup in that time, whereas Leeds were getting to the FA Cup final and semi-finals nearly every season. So I don't know whether Bob Paisley, as it was then, sacrificed the FA Cup in order to go for the league and the European Cup. I don't know, but yeah, I feel really bitter about it now, looking back and knowing that, Leeds had that number of points that should have won us more titles. But what can you say apart from fair play to the opposition teams that went on incredible runs and pipped us at the post so many times?
So in retrospect, besides, as you said, sacrificing competitions, what could or what should they have done differently, taking into account the realities of their era?
Yeah, I don't know if they could. If Don Revie says that they needed to get the money in from the European Cup runs, then sort of have to go with his decision. But I think that's the big one. I think especially as they won the Fairs Cup in 1968, they could have sacrificed the UEFA Cup or Fairs Cup as it was, and just gone for the league and the FA Cup, because you're not going to sacrifice the FA Cup. Back then, the FA Cup was the biggest competition in the world, bigger than the league. I don't know, maybe during that period, maybe the league became bigger as time went on. But certainly at the beginning of the era in the mid-60s, the FA Cup final was the biggest day on the calendar, no matter what. So, yeah, I think maybe just sacrificing the European exploits to win the league and get in the European Cup, maybe things would have been very different then. Maybe then people nowadays would be talking about Leeds as one of the greatest teams of all time because they would have won multiple European Cups. I am convinced by it.
As often happens when a manager who defines the club leave, Leeds did struggle in the post-Revie years, though of course reaching that ill-fated 1975 European Cup final. What do you think were the main factors in Leeds' decline over the following seasons through the rest of the 70s and into the 80s, basically?
Well, I mean, it's said that the board messed up terribly. I mean, the first decision was to appoint Brian Clough, who obviously legendary manager, but who had been massively critical of Leeds. He was the arch enemy, and he had made enemies of all the players at Leeds with real scathing attacks on various players. And suddenly he was being given Don Revie's job, and there was a lot of bitterness. And yeah, it was a very odd decision. And then, yeah, they get through that season very close to winning the European Cup. But at the end of that match, the Leeds fans had rioted in Paris, and Leeds ended up getting banned from Europe for 4 years, ended up getting reduced to 2 years, actually. But when they were banned from Europe, the players then know that they're not going to be able to fulfill their goal. They were all pretty much in their 30s then. They know then that their chances of winning the European Cup are over. I don't know if that affected them, but then certainly you're at the point where you're having to rebuild a side, and very difficult to find top players. Leeds weren't the richest team, of course, like I just said about, not having the wealth and the resources of other clubs. So difficult to replace world-class players. These were players that had come up through the ranks, and yeah, for whatever reason, they didn't have that talent coming through on tap. So yeah, I think a number of bad decisions, and again, yeah, like you say, I think the natural hangover from that era and pressure on the future, the next generation, as we're seeing at Old Trafford, and in the current day, and obviously when Wenger left with Arsenal as well, and obviously Liverpool in the last before Klopp came in the last 30 years, pretty much. So I think a natural drop off, but yeah, especially bad for Leeds, and I think that European ban must have played a part as well.
Why do you think Revie was unable to replicate his success as England manager? Does this in any way affect his legacy at Leeds?
Yeah, I think the England job's so different. So, Revie had, his thing was the togetherness at Leeds, all for one and one for all, us against the world, building that family. That was his main thing that he would always talk about, was being a family, and they would all live in each other's back pockets. He would take them away for away games for at least one night, and they would all have to be in the hotel together, playing carpet bowls or cards or bingo, doing something all together. And England, trying to replicate that is impossible, of course. They're teammates when they come together for a week, and then you don't see them again for a month or whatever. But also as well, it was a poor England side at the time. They were on a poor cycle. There's not a lot of talent in that squad that Revie inherited. Obviously, like Kevin Keegan was the standout player, and not saying that Revie did as well as he would have hoped to do. Of course, they should have done better. Results weren't great. But I think, also, I think he was a bit inhibited by the talent at his disposal. But I don't think it's affected his legacy at Leeds at all. No, none whatsoever. If anything, maybe he did go out at the right time. In the end, players were starting to wane, coming towards the end of their careers. I would have hated for him to be part of the Leeds decline. So we'll never know, of course, but maybe he got out at the right time, because his legacy certainly remained untouched and left that thought of what if he'd have stayed, would we have won the European Cup in 1975? Would we have won the league again? Probably. Derby won the league with a sickeningly low total, 58 points, which was unheard of. Leeds were getting mid-60s most seasons. Yeah, I think maybe 59 was the lowest that Leeds got in those 10 seasons. And then suddenly, a really low total comes along and wins the league. So I don't know. A lot of regrets and what ifs, but I don't think it affected his legacy at Leeds. Going to England and not succeeding there.
And for yourself, Do you have any more books in the pipeline?
Yeah, I do. I'm writing one at the moment that's basically following Marcelo Bielsa's time at Uruguay. So I'm documenting that from when he took over last summer through to the World Cup in 2026. So yeah, I'm very excited about the Copa America. I'm flying out on tomorrow actually, so I'm able to go to a couple of games, which will be an amazing experience. So yeah, that'll probably be my next book. I do have a little hole in my Leeds collection. So I've sort of done from the Revie era all the way through to the modern day, but I've not done the Howard Wilkinson time yet. So I have started working on that, but sort of on the back burner at the moment. I'm a bit burnt out. I've done 5. I think I need a bit of a break from it. I've got Uruguay, bubbling away in the background, and then after that, I think I'll try and get Howard Wilkinson done, and then see what happens from there, because I enjoy doing it. I like having something on the go. It's a nice hobby and a really nice distraction from the modern day stresses of following Leeds.
In closing, what is it that makes the Revie era at Leeds such a unique story? And what makes it different from other football dynasties?
Yeah, I think the unique thing about Leeds was the fact that there were a team of one club men, pretty much this team of 9 youngsters that came through and played together the whole careers. I mean, it's completely unheard of. If you research how many players have played over 700 games for a single of the top clubs in the world, you go through all of them one by one. You know, Liverpool have had 2, Man United have had 3, I think. Most teams have had 1 or none at all, and Leeds have got like 6 from this one era and a couple that are in the 600s. That's what really makes this team stand out. You know, there can't be another team in the world that have won so many matches together. It's quite remarkable. And the fact that it's with a club that had done nothing and have done nothing since, and yet, like, just this 10-year period has made Leeds United a huge institution with a worldwide fan base. Leeds, even though they've been out of the Premier League for, apart from those 3 seasons, it's 20 years now as a lower league team, even dropping to League One. And yet our income from shirt sales is right up there with most of the Premier League teams. It would sort of be mid-table Premier League for merchandise income. So yeah, it's remarkable. And that's all down to Don Revie and that team, because Leeds have barely done anything outside of that era. And yeah, the only other team I can think of that has been so organic, all coming through the youth team. Obviously, you had Man United in the 90s, had the class of 92 and a fair few youngsters, but it wasn't a full team, and it was only a few years. Barcelona under Guardiola actually is the only one that I could find. Not extensive research. I'm sure there are other clubs, but of the top teams down the years that have dominated and been a force in Europe, Barcelona at that time between 2008 and 2018, they sort of had 8 players homegrown in the first 11 like Leeds, and just 3 players that were bought. So very similar. But yeah, Leeds, it's a story that we'll probably never see again now. Having seen that Barcelona team come through La Masia like they did, I'm not sure that we'll see it again. It's such a unique thing and magical and amazing. It's a dream come true to have a youth team, progress and just fulfill potential and carry a club like that to such great heights. Yeah, just a remarkable time.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. As always, feel free to leave questions and comments. Again, all our respective contact information and the link to Mr. Dean's book, and I should say books, are on the blog and podcast uploads. So, Rocco, thank you very much, and hope to continue these discussions on Leeds football history.
Thank you very much for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.